I think sometimes the media, particularly in from Ireland, are sometimes can be a bit irresponsible. And like people have been locked up for years and are trying to go on holidays. Some of the stuff is misreported. First of all, in Spain, because they depend so much on tourism, they're going to protect a large amount of the flights. So even if you're supposed to go on strike, you have to do those flights by law, right? Um, so if you're a striker and you're put on a flight that's a protected flight, you've got to operate it. So it's not like Ireland where so talks about walkouts, it just doesn't happen, right? So there'll be a large amount of flights protected because the Spanish government want to protect tourism, and that decision is out today. And then there's a large amount of our people who want to work as normal. So we expect minimal impact this weekend, as best we can see it. But we'll have a better sense of it today when we see the amount of protected flights. And if we need to cancel anything, we'll contact passengers directly. That's why we didn't go and cancel anything. So, but if something needs to be cancelled, we'll do it. But I think people have got to ask themselves that you have had. There are two unions in Spain that we've been trying to negotiate with for 5 years, and we haven't been able to reach any sort of an agreement with them. When I've done a deal with every other union in Europe and every other country, the largest union in Spain, CCO, we were able to do a deal with them in 6 weeks, which I think tells you the dynamic that we're up against here. And they have actually got an agreement that they can say to staff, why would you go on strike? Sure, there's all these, there's pay increases, there's better rosters and all that. We've done a deal. Here today, we're going to fly 50 million passengers. I'm not trying to nickel and dime this. We're doing it in the right way. We just need to be talking to the right people. But the other two unions, I don't know. They were looking for a 167% increase in pay post-COVID. Come on. So I think even our own crew have tired of this. So I don't expect there to be. And don't forget, airplanes as well are not covered by so the airplanes from Dublin are going to Malaga aren't covered by any sort of strike action anyway. So there's a lot of other interrelated stuff that works. In Italy, I don't expect any disruption either because the unions in Italy, we've done all agreements in Italy. We have agreements in Italy. It's the unrecognised unions, and the last time they called a strike, one cabin crew person went on strike. In Portugal this weekend, there'll be no disruption because there's only 3% or something of the staff that are in the other union. And to the best of my knowledge, just as how the roster fell, none of them are working this weekend. So Portugal's not going to be impacted at all. Belgium will be impacted, but not too many people are going on their holidays to Belgium from Ireland that I know of. Bruges is very nice and all that, but you can get there another way, through Eindhoven or Amsterdam. So this idea of chaos, walkouts, doesn't apply. For example, in Italy, you can't go on strike in August. You're not allowed. So
how many unions does Ryanair have to deal with in your 36 countries? You've identified the biggest cabin crew union, the biggest pilot union in every country you deal, and you do deals with them.
Yeah, but what happened was that because in 2017, and we did it all at the one time, some of the unions that came along presented themselves as being the representative unions, when if we did this in a more orderly way, it might have been a little bit different. But by and large, there's one pilot union per country. In most of the countries, it's one cabin crew union, but in several countries, and there's no problem with that. In Italy, we've got two unions that we recognise for cabin crew, and or three, I think. And in Spain, it's three now with the CCOO. But CCOO are like SIP2 here. They're the largest national union, and as I say, we were able to do a deal with them within about 6 weeks. And but the answer isn't to go on strike. But we don't expect disruption this weekend by certainly what's been put out there in the media.
What's the maximum number of flights you've lost to a strike? You had that in 2018, 2019.
You look at what happened in Belgium a couple of weekends ago. There was 1% of flights that were affected overall. Today, we will fly 530,000 people today on just over 3,000 flights. If there's a couple of flights in Belgium, or if Belgium is affected, it is a drop in the ocean. And I think there are more than sufficient people willing to work and more than sufficient government holdbacks on these things not to have chaos, because they have to deal with it at the other end, that there won't be disruption this weekend. Is my view is that there won't be any real disruption this weekend but we'll just wait and see what happens. But
And Dublin Airport. Last September, we heard about the enhanced security checking. You guys complained about it. Aer Lingus complained about it. What you got through it. The numbers were probably a bit higher than anyone anticipated. What did you guys do that DA didn't do?
Ryanair has, and you can see that here today, we have an awful lot more probably influence at European level now than we do at local level. It's hard to be a prophet in your own land, as I often say, and that we're the largest airline in Europe. And I think we're able to point the relevant agencies to what was likely to unfold at Dublin Airport. And then they worked with the airport in terms of what security. We don't get involved in that. I mean, that's a separate part of it, but at least we'd know who the people were in terms of the decision makers over there, because, and I think that has worked. And I think the DAA, in fairness to them, have managed well, touch wood, over the last number of weeks. I mean, I think this morning there was less than 20-minute delays at the airport. I mean, I went through there myself on Sunday. Probably most of it is now down to traffic, and maybe the tarpaulin outside probably needs to go. I don't know whether we ever needed that in the first place. But anyway, look, they're doing their best to get people through the system, and I think everyone in Ireland now knows when they're going through Dublin Airport how many of the lanes are open. Is it 14 or 15 lanes? And I think that has kept DAA on their toes as well. But they are hiring a huge amount of people to go through. So I think they'll look back on this as something like a lot of companies didn't hire people in time. We did it differently. And I think we were amazed that other companies didn't do what we did. Now, we're not immune from this either.
What did you do that was different?
We never let anyone go. And we instead of heading off to the golf course or during COVID or staying at home, from day one, if you recall, we said to our people from day one, we're going to continue to employ you, we're going to keep you current. And that gave people great certainty. That means that they stayed within you can't expect people, if they work for you, to say, go away, and will you be around when at some time indeterminate will you come back to us?
No. The pilots were licensed and the aircraft were certified.
And as well, and if you remember, we were at the forefront of masks at the very start. You seem to recall there were various people who, even from a medical perspective, said we were talking nonsense at the time. We were at the forefront of the European Centre of Disease Control. I remember talking about that endlessly on the radio until people talked about, oh yeah, the European Centre of Disease Control, they're the ones who are responsible for managing pandemics in Europe. And we were at the forefront of putting in the passport, the vaccine passport. And that again was two things: our access to people in Europe, because we're the largest European airline. As a matter of fact, today we're the second largest airline in the world, passenger-wise. Southwest and ourselves were bigger than Delta, United, China Eastern, any of those airlines.
EasyJet are now rescheduling. British Airways took 10% out at the beginning of May. You didn't face any of those decisions.
No, but like, as I say, we're not immune to this, because what happens is the biggest blockage at the moment for us there's two things: air traffic control, which didn't staff up, the people who handle your bags and your check-in at some of our airports in other countries. So if they're not resourced, that has an effect on us. So last weekend, for example, we would have had a lot of air traffic control delays. Those crews that started at, say, 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, who have to finish before midnight so that they're available for the next late shift the next day. Some of those airplanes didn't get back till 2 o'clock in the morning. That means those crews are now out of hours. That means you eat up your standbys and you've got delays. So this becomes self-perpetuating. It's not like having a shop where you can get somebody to do overtime. You can't do overtime in aviation in terms of pilots and cabin crew. There are strict daily limits. So we're really up against that. We've got the right number of people, more than the right number of people, of pilots and cabin crew across the entire network, and we've grown by 115% since the summer. But ATC are letting us down, and some companies, particularly ground handling in the UK, is a mess, or security is a mess in some places. So we're not immune from that, but I think we will. We have obviously a far better summer than most other airlines, because we've been able to grow but we're subject to delays.
What's that doing with market share? If I'm right, Italy's your biggest by numbers.
Yeah.
Spain is your second biggest.
Yeah. And Italy is one of the biggest by market share. We now have almost 40% of the market in Italy.
And post-COVID, without getting in trouble with the stock exchange, what's going to happen market share in all those big
I
countries?
don't know, it's not that. I mean, it's well known from, it's well known what our ambitions are. Like, if other airlines contract, then we're just automatically going to get bigger market shares. And because we're growing, it'll be even bigger market shares. So the big ones, I say, were Italy, touch at 40%.
40%, yeah.
So what will happen now is that you will have, I think we're going to have to wait and see what happens this winter and next summer about who takes out permanent capacity. And don't forget, most of those airlines are saddled with debt because they got bailed out, so they're not going to be expanding. And that's what I suppose is driving up sort of ticket prices as well in the peak. So, I would say to people, like, book early, like particularly I think September and October, we're going to have an extended season here. You can go to Madeira, you can go to all these fantastic destinations. Like, we've got almost 130 destinations out of Dublin, and there's plenty of them to go around for September and October if things are beginning to get sold out in August in particular. Market share, we're the largest airline in Spain with 22% market share.
And is that growing? And,
Yeah.
And are you
Because we've got all these aircraft coming as well.
And Britain with EasyJet, are you?
I think we'll see growth in market share next year, and I think you'll see us returning to domestics because the UK have now halved the APD, the airport departure tax on domestic flying. So I think we'll be back in on domestic flying into the UK, which I think will be something that we haven't been in for a number of years because it was so expensive.
Is the certification of Ryanair UK problem solved? That you were able to bring aircraft in?
Yeah, I mean, the question is that, you've got to be, in other words, the downside of Brexit, which is 2 aircraft identical with the exact same crews, the exact same training, are now viewed the day after Brexit differently from the UK authorities as from the European authorities. And I think you're going to see more of that. I mean, I think the UK is suffering from a major labour shortage.
And in France, you're never really based heavily in France, but is your market share?
We're growing. Yeah. We're growing. I mean, like, if you look at what we're doing in France, we're only got 7 or 8% market share. We're third in the market over there, but we're not concentrated in Paris, but we've opened Marseille. We've got 5 aircraft based there. Toulouse is going really well for us. Bordeaux is going particularly well for us as well. So they're the bases that we have, and along with Beauvais is now a base as well. But don't forget, regional France is particularly attractive to the UK, so people can fly from regional UK airports as well as London into Limoges, Biarritz, Bordeaux, Carcassonne, Béziers, all these places where people can get into second homes and all that. So you'll find that in regional French airports, they're really supportive of Ryanair.
And finally, Germany, you had big ambitions for Germany, but you're out of the main Frankfurt airport. Are you sort of, is it a lost cause at this stage?
No, I mean, I think what's going to happen is it's the only market that we have contracted in, but like Frankfurt Main want us to pay €50 per passenger, and if you were to say to people who are standing in a queue to get through security in Frankfurt, by the way, of your fare that you may have paid $9.99 for, Ryanair has to pay them €50 to walk through this airport, and there's a structural problem with charges at German airports, and I think it's going to play out. What's going to happen is that Lufthansa are going to gouge German consumers over the next 2 to 3 years until the Germans get wise to it and realise they've got to realign the cost structure. But the airports that are different are the ones, the small private airports. We opened the base in Nuremberg, doing fantastically well. Nuremberg's got 50,000 people in Adidas, Puma and SAP down there in terms of a corporate place for us to do business. Niederrhein, very close to the Dutch border, and we can't get into Netherlands because, the government and KLM have cut up the whole thing, between themselves. And then you take other airports like Baden-Baden, Hahn, Memmingen, west of Munich. Like, those smaller airports can really compete, but it's the lazy Frankfurts, Berlins, that just are Munichs that just sit back and play to the German corporate customer And I think Germans, ordinary working Germans, are going to finally wake up and find out that airfare is going to go through the roof, even more so than they have anywhere else.
Has COVID made protectionism worse, or has it helped chip away at it?
I think people's memories of everything just disappears with the morning mist, everyone forgets about it, like when they move until something else happens, and I think that's what's happened with the explosion in travel. People want to travel, and most of the airlines weren't ready. We were ready. ATC wasn't ready. The handling companies weren't ready. And I think you'll see a different landscape next summer.
December 2002, that first route into Spain, Ryanair had come from something like 4.5 million when you joined it, passengers a year. And London and England was where all the action had been. Big decision to go to an airport nobody'd heard of.
Yeah, well, what we did was we cracked the monopoly that Iberia had. Iberia, the Spanish-owned, government-owned airline, were allowed to do the handling for all their competitors, and they priced everyone else out of it. We came up with a new structure for handling, which lowered the cost, created jobs. It was just the Ryanair model in a microcosm. And then once we got going there, the Spanish had already built the airports, they just weren't being utilised. And we were able to come across all this brand new infrastructure and to utilise it for 12 months of the year and connect it. So it was a no-brainer for us in a way, because there wasn't that much of an investment because the airport was there. We didn't really have to convince anyone. There was no extra discounts on fees there. Spanish airports do their best to be competitive because the Spanish government holds them back. We would like them to be lower, but we just had to crack the handling part of it, which we did.
There was something like 70 other airlines in Europe who were at the same size as you at the time. What had you got that they hadn't, and what did Iberia do to resist it?
Well, I think because we move fast. Like there's still a relatively small management team, and that's why, you generally get, very protective of them, particularly when you see some of them. You see some of the comment in the media about holiday chaos and all this, and you talk to the people, not just the management team, like everybody in the place who works hard. We've worked hard to get back, and you're proud of them. They're agile. Most of them are still Irish, and I think they have what we've lost in Ireland many, many years ago is ingenuity, taking a chance, getting something done, see what happens, and if you can do that in a regulated industry, you can conquer anything, and I think it was I still get a great buzz out of it.
Favourite story, personal story of that first baby steps into Spain way back?
Favourite story? Well, myself and I had done all the groundwork for a deal that we were to do with Reyes. Was unaware of the political things between the two towns down there, Reyes and Tarragona. And of course, we called Reyes Barcelona South at that time. And Michael was coming down with me to do the announcement. And one of the things like Michael loves to do is arrive in a football jersey, for the local team. So we got off in Barcelona, or got off in Reyes Airport, and Michael had a Barcelona jersey on because we had called it Barcelona, but that was the equivalent of getting off with a Leeds jersey in Manchester. And everyone was saying to me, because I had done the groundwork for the deal, who's the guy in the Barcelona jersey? And I said, he owns the company. So they said, well, okay. So, and so that was my favourite Spanish story. I can't tell you the other one.
Ryanair is key for the tourism business in Spain. You provide good connectivity, you create jobs, you contribute to our economic growth. Ryanair has invested a lot in Spain, and I hope you will invest more. And we can say that Spain is strategic for Ryanair. Ryanair is the first airline in Spain and deserves credit for improving connectivity between Ireland and Spain. In 2019, 55% of the passengers. And Ryanair has opened in these 20 years, many Spanish destinations that were not under the radar of Irish people before, such as Verona, Sevilla, or Alicante.
It's a real honour to be here today. And I can say that this is my 25th year in Ryanair, and some people get away with murder for less, but I'm there 25 years. But I'm proud to say I was opened up Spain for Ryanair back in 2002 with the opening of our base in Girona. Prior to that, we had some charter flights, but that was our first base when we sort of cracked the monopoly that the incumbent airline had on handling their and Girona. And I remember that day opening. We opened in December in the Costa Brava. And I remember the guy at the airport who was selling the sandwiches, who was told to have sandwiches prepared for people that day because that airport wasn't used. It was only used in the summertime for charter traffic. And he thought we were crazy and nobody was going to ever show up, but the flight from Han would never arrive, you know. And, you know, you go from that to, and I don't want to steal the thunder of what PwC are going to say, but like, since that day, we have transported 400 million people to and from Spain since 2002. We've got 6,000 jobs, direct jobs down there, and we're directly responsible for 300,000 jobs in Spain. And I think that's the sort of recognition that we've had, I think, in working in partnership with the Spanish government and, you know, the various agencies there. And I think that, you know, they do have a joined up approach to things in Spain. You know, they have, albeit the airport, the vast majority are owned centrally by government, and it's a legacy thing in Spain that everybody would live within 50 miles, I think, or 50 kilometers of a major airport, and they've invested in airports. And while we always have our arguments about whether they're expensive or not, there's great infrastructure there, and that allows you then to, you never have any constraints in putting modern aircraft into places like La Palma or Santiago or Jerez, or we just opened today Avedeo, 5 new routes to Avedeo. So like we're doing 600-700 routes. We're going to fly 50 million passengers this year to Spain. We're an integral part of the economy down there, not just in what we would normally call the normal tourism that you would associate with, you know, whether that's in the Costa del Sol, but, you know, Malaga is a great city destination, Santiago is a great city destination, you know, places like Valladolid that we learned about in history, but eventually made our way to see what it was all about there. So it is great to sort of celebrate that today. We're going to continue to invest. We have an order for 210 aircraft, and we want to put as many of those aircraft into Spain as possible. We've grown by 10% this year. We're going to do it in a sustainable way, particularly with the new aircraft as well. And that's become so important for airlines and airports, and particularly economies like Spain, that are not unlike other Mediterranean and peripheral economies that rely so much on tourism. That's their Ruhr Valley, you know, and compared with the Germans. So you know, so their tourism isn't some fickle thing or is discretionary. It's an integral part of those economies, and we can support that with point-to-point travel, and we hope to continue that. And thank you today for giving us this platform, I suppose, to celebrate that. And the PwC report that we'll see now, I think, was independently, is an independent report and bears out the facts that in some ways we were surprised by as well, because we just work hard sometimes and forget about what we bring. But thank you.